Welcome back, everyone. We're here with the next talk, Fail Fast, Learn Faster, Building an Experimentation Culture in Ocado Technology. Our speaker leads data and machine learning innovation at Ocado Group, ensuring cutting-edge developments in e-commerce, supply chain, logistics, and robotics. As the lead for responsible AI in robotics, she ensures these technologies are developed with fairness and transparency. Previously, she led responsible machine learning at the BBC, creating its first comprehensive standard for responsible machine learning. She's a former British diplomat. Myrna has worked on international economic and climate negotiations, serving in different countries, Kosovo, Belgium, Germany, and Israel. Let's welcome to the stage Myrna Macgregor from Ocado Group, please.
Hi, everyone. Thank you for coming along. Today, I am going to talk about experimentation within the data team in Ocado Technology. I'll give an introduction to our business and our business context and some of the uses of AI that we currently have across our platform, and then I'll go on to talk about why we want to encourage experimentation within our data teams, a couple of examples of where we've done that, and some of the lessons that we've had. So hoping not to take up the whole session, so we'll have time for questions at the end. So let me know if there's anything you were particularly curious about. So just a bit about me. We just had my bio, so I probably won't spend any time on this. But an interesting pathway into the data world. I was a diplomat for 11 years, transitioned into media and technology policy, and then I do both responsible AI and data strategy, first at the BBC and now at Ocado Technology. So I am not technical, but I end up working with a lot of data teams, collaborating with them, working up guidance or tooling or priority setting with them as well. So in terms of the context of Ocado Technology, we are much, much more than the vans bringing groceries to your doorstep. So I'll talk a little bit about what our business context is and why robotics, automation, and AI are so important for us. So first of all, our context. So online grocery is challenging, and I think more challenging than the average online retail setting. So I think the main things are the level of complexity and what we need to get right. So you've got multiple temperature regimes, chill, ambient, and frozen, quite large basket sizes and weird things going in of lots of different size and shape, things that could spoil if put next to each other, or things that could squish other things, and so some quite careful placement required. And also from a customer context, and I'm very much one of these customers, very frequent order editing, so it's quite difficult to plan. So I'm definitely changing things that I want the night before. That's part of the sort of customer-consumer expectation, so they want consistent freshness. You don't want to be delivered fruit with only a couple of days left on the use by, really high food safety requirements, an expectation for no substitutions, and an on-time delivery within some quite narrow availability slots. And then on our side of things, as I mentioned, some quite high complexity in terms of picking and packing, and really getting the most efficiency out of every process, because it's a very low margin industry and some quite high cost to fulfill. So we are online only, and I guess kind of data and AI first. And we find data, AI, and automation are important at every stage of the journey. I like to say Ocado is almost 4 or 5 businesses in one. So we have the entire supply chain from e-commerce and the web shop to figuring out what to order and when, and getting it to our warehouses, fulfilling the order within the warehouse, some quite advanced robotics within that, which I'll cover, and then actually last mile and delivery. The other thing is our technology business is actually B2B rather than B2C. So we work with 13 partners around the world, building the Ocado Smart Platform that can meet customer needs in lots of different geographies. So I'll give you some examples of the kinds of data AI ML work that we currently do, and this is the basis for doing more experimentation on top of. So e-commerce is quite an obvious one. We need smart features to allow customers to navigate between a really large range. We're really proud of being able to offer the largest range, so 50,000 products. Trying to personalize that experience to enable discovery or reordering of commonly ordered things by each customer. And what you see on the right is smart shops, so the ability to predict what someone's basket might look like on the basis of previous orders, and within a couple of clicks, adding everything to cart. And then you've got recommendation engines to try and recreate that spontaneity of being in the aisle and spotting something new that you want to try. In supply chain, I think what's really exciting is around using deep learning models to predict with increasing accuracy what customers will want and in what quantity over some quite long periods, and really optimizing that to enable really low purge, so the need to throw it away or discount it, which is one of those win-win for the business and costs, but also for the environment as well. And so the systems we've built can be up to 50% more accurate than using traditional team-driven forecasting systems. You might have seen something around our army of bots. AI helps orchestrate the movement of these bots around our automated warehouses to fulfill orders in the most efficient way, much speedier than picking in a supermarket aisle. We use computer vision to diagnose if something's gone wrong with the bots and locate those quickly, and also in a predictive maintenance setting and figuring out when we might need to preemptively have a look at one of the bots. Really excitingly, we're starting to roll out robotic picking, so the ability both on the grid and off the grid to pick items, which is a hugely technical, complex challenge. It's one of those fun things around, really easy for a 5-year-old to do, really difficult for a robot. So you're picking things like crisps or cans or milk or oranges, and so needing reinforcement learning to figure out how to interact with slightly different settings each time that you're trying to pick that from a tote. And then finally, last mile and delivery. So we use AI to optimize routing, find the most efficient route on the basis of traffic conditions or weather or previous pathing to figure out the most efficient route and the maximum number of drops that we can put our vans on. So my task was thinking about how we can increase innovation and iteration within the data organization. Our data organization is quite a chunky set of teams, but across data science, data analytics, data engineering, and simulation. And not only are we keen on making sure we fulfill the roadmap of client commitments and things we have planned to roll out, but we also want to make sure we stay ahead of the curve and spend a good amount of time thinking about what's next, what's happening down in a couple of years, and how we can make sure that it becomes the most compelling proposition for our partners and our prospects. And as I'm sure you're all familiar with, it is actually quite tough to develop and land new data projects, especially data science projects. One of the issues is ideation and the art of the possible and trying to influence product colleagues, especially if they've got heads down, focused on roadmaps, or they don't really understand what AI, ML can do. And it's how do you get to them? How do you work with them and get them to think about what could be possible, particularly if you've got a slightly longer time frame for development for data science projects, so it's not something that can be developed and delivered in the next couple of weeks, for example. It's hard for the data teams themselves. They can get pretty bogged down, either in developing and ideating a new idea. I've seen data teams build things for months and not sufficiently socialize and test them, and then they'll perfect something that isn't technically the right fit, that perhaps product wasn't keen on, and ultimately the customer or our client is not that keen on either. So it's a huge amount of time that could have been slightly refined or redirected. Also, the danger of getting bogged down in development is sometimes you don't reach out early enough, think about system integration, and then you've over-designed it and it becomes difficult to integrate, and that creates further delays. And then just pulling yourself up from delivery, roadmaps, and business as usual, and all of the maintenance and support work, it could be quite difficult to set aside some resource for exploration. So that's the kind of context that I think a lot of data teams, data science teams face in terms of trying to land new ideas. So developed an initiative called Data Bets. And in the name, you've got this sense that it's an idea, it's a bit risky, it perhaps hasn't been tried out before, but we're going to have a go and see what happens. And a data bet is intended to quickly and cheaply validate ideas that are outside of business as usual, the roadmap that I mentioned, and focusing on an area where a data team can kind of incubate some initial work. And then we have something to show our stakeholders, something validated, ideally, as this is the right approach. We should put more resource into this. So rather than bring stakeholders an idea, you bring them some evidence of a small slice of something that's already working. 3 key components to putting together a data bet. It's having the idea or the hypothesis itself. Actually building a POC, some kind of prototype, some kind of data analytics model perhaps, and showing that it meets the objective that you set out, particularly the business objectives. It has some kind of impact on a metric that the business cares about. And then having that basis to evangelize from and seek either adoption if it's an internal tool or analytics product, or get it onto a roadmap and get some more additional product and engineering to support to build it out. So I'll talk you through a couple of bets. But first, I want to talk a bit about the structure and the mechanisms that support a data bet. So not always the biggest Jeff Bezos fan, but this is a good quote. Good intentions don't work, mechanisms do, and I'm all about mechanisms. So the key mechanisms for data bets were actually defining the hypothesis with a bit more rigor, rather than someone in the business having an idea and then running with the idea. We developed a capability definition document, so riffing off some existing product documentation. And I'll take you through the structure of that in a second. But the idea is you kick the idea around a bit better, you identify the smallest possible slice that you can work on and validate, not the whole thing, the smallest possible thing, so it's very lean startup approach, and then define some success criteria that you and your team are going to be held to. The other key thing was actually allocating dedicated resource, so not using 10% time, actually having a bet delivery lead or a mini team to support that, and flexing how much resource according to the ambition of the bet or how much resource might be available, but ideally spending a good chunk of their week on it, and also having someone in the data leadership team act as a sponsor, and the sponsor ends up doing more of the evangelization, requirements work, and then the bet delivery lead, of course, does I guess more of the building of the bet itself. And then the last key thing was having a regular review cycle. So we were very inspired by Ben Diaz of EasyJet, who came and talked to us about an initiative called 6 Weeks to Value, where he gave his teams 6 weeks to build something and to demo in front of their board. We weren't quite as aggressive as that. We didn't give them just one 6-week sprint, but we did have a 6-week review cycle of where have you got to, should you continue, what are you going to validate in the next 6 weeks, and that decision around, is this enough? Is this promising enough? Or should we be pivoting? Should we be graduating? Is it successful enough to hand off somewhere else? Or should we be stopping it? So a kind of decision point every 6 weeks to prevent things drifting on and doing that perfecting problem that I talked about earlier. So this is our capability definition document template, pretty short. It's rarely longer than a couple of pages. So you've got the problem definition part, so defining the problem, what's the need, what evidence supports the fact that there's a problem, ideally data-driven, why it's worth solving, so linking to a business metric or a business priority, or telling some kind of user story as to why this is necessary, and then the solution description. So the solution description is both, in a maximalist, perfect world, what might this look like, but then what's the smallest slice we should be seeking to validate within the data bet. What's your intended impact? How do we measure that? And I think what's really key is also defining what's out of scope. So what problems are you not going to try and solve, just to have a bit of limitation there. Define your stakeholders, who's going to be providing feedback on this. So we're not wholly incubating. You do need some level of feedback as you go along, but ultimately you might not be asking for endorsement until the bet is validated. And then that validation becomes graduation success criteria. So at what point do we start working on it like this and we try and broaden and hand off to more regular business processes, get in Jira, that sort of thing. Also at the beginning, defining what resources you're going to need, what kind of skills are necessary to mock up this bet, what percentages of time, and our data teams are based within each of the areas I showed you earlier. So sometimes it's pulling across areas as well, working in a different way to what data teams are used to doing. So this is the first bet that I'll talk you through. It's actually a data analytics bet, and it's around building a cost to serve. So each individual item that we are helping ship to a customer, how much did that cost in terms of warehouse operations? And the problem the team identified was that they really felt we needed a deeper and more consistent understanding of those commercial metrics. How much does this cost? Across our operations, so not just in an individual work stream context, but also just how much does it cost the entire business to do a thing? And the hypothesis is by calculating this individual cost, we can help product managers internally relate an idea or initiative directly to a projected reduction in costs. So it becomes less about, I think we can save money. It becomes more about, I think we can save this much money. And that's going to enable better planning and prioritization decisions, so a bit of a theory of change there. So the success criteria for the bet is not quite that hypothesis. It's actually that we can build this model, that the data is available, it will all ladder up, and we can ensure that it goes end to end for all of our warehouse operations. And then if a PM comes to us and says, I want to know how much labor we can reduce with this idea, we could actually do a cash figure per each, so each as a product. So the validation, the criteria of the bet itself was if we could get backing for this sort of idea, and if product managers were willing to use it, so very much targeting internal decision making. So this is something I've adapted. Probably will look quite familiar to you in terms of experimentation, iteration, workflow. So it's build the prototype, design, and build an interface so that people can interact with your prototype, do some testing within the team, and then bring it to some business users to see whether it meets their requirements, refine it, scale it further once you've got that initial feedback, and then keep experimenting and iterating on the basis of that. So this bet got pretty much all the way through those stages, and I'll show you how. So the team built up the simplest possible version of a global model, which sounds a little bit counterintuitive, simple and global, that could work for all of our sites. So not just the site that they initially mocked up, but actually every site around the world. And then they built some visualizations to allow users to analyze costs from multiple perspectives, so you could kind of cut it in different ways, so you could show how it could be used. So total cost, or look at labor breakdown, comparison across sites. So a lot of our partners have multiple sites with us, so you can compare and contrast. And having this model and all of the visualizations was successful in getting exec level buy-in and backing, and it's gradually being used by teams. Perhaps not the widespread adoption we'd hoped for, and that's one of our lessons, not quite the big bang like excitement, but we actually had a small feature within this that ended up having a lot more success than the bigger model. And maybe that's a lesson learned for us as well. Sometimes a simpler approach is easier to secure adoption for. So the team built a smaller version of this, which was called the What If tool, and it was just a way of converting changes in product metrics to a financial value. in a way that related to bottom line. And as I mentioned here, it was just a minor feature. It was just something like a little fun spreadsheet, effectively. It took up 10% of development time. But that's the one that got actually the most initial buy-in, and our CPO mandated that all product initiatives had to be valued using this tool in Q3, which is pretty great impact for something that we just introduced. The other bet that I wanted to cover, I think everyone's doing it, GenAI. Let's have a go, see if it works. And so the functionality we were looking at was using it for knowledge retrieval. And specifically finding information about how the smart platform is configured. And the hypothesis was, it's easy, right? A lot of vendors are approaching us being like, all you have to do is plug in your documentation and it'll take a day. And then you'll have magical answers, which are entirely relevant and accurate on your documentation, delivered in natural language, job done. So we were like, okay, well, let's give it a go in a lower risk setting. So it's our own documentation that we know pretty well. Let's have a go at seeing whether it can provide these relevant and accurate responses to user queries. And we had a set of queries via our customer success, our partner success team. So some questions that are commonly asked or have come in the last week, and how they were answered by humans. And so we had quite a good knowledge base to compare and contrast to. So we knew a typical question, and we knew what the answer should actually look like. What we were hoping to do with something like this is eventually, if successful, roll this out directly to partners. They don't even have to come to our partner success team with perhaps some of the more straightforward questions about configuration or how does this work or what is this feature. And then our partner success team could spend more time in a more consultancy capacity, helping answer more difficult questions, or recommending certain setups, as opposed to say, what is this, going from like, why is this, or something, or like a more mature conversation. Also, by enabling quicker setup and quicker answering of questions, hoping to increase confidence in the platform, enable smoother setup and adoption of any new features we roll out. So the data bet itself wasn't seeking to do all of that. We thought we would just, the smaller slice was, can we provide a tool that would be helpful to our partner success team? We're not going to put it in front of partners. We're not quite confident enough to do that. But can it help them deal with the tickets? So we set ourselves the goal of maybe reducing the amount of time they spent on tickets, the simpler tickets specifically by 15%, just pulled a number out of the air. And also, actually, what this is trying to test is if LLMs and RAG are actually the right solution to this problem. We also looked at, like, can we just improve our search? And maybe I'll come back to that in a bit. So going back to our stages, this is where we ended up. So we built the prototype. We built several prototypes, actually. I think most of them had interfaces that we could already use more or less, so we didn't build anything that felt super shiny. And then started testing that internally on that sort of golden truth set of answers that I mentioned, and then tested with a sample of business users in our partner success team in a more live capacity as well, to see if it could help with incoming questions. And it was on the basis of this testing that we stopped, and I will show you why. So these are the findings using lots of different models. We started out with Google Vertex AI. We moved on to OpenAI, GPT 3.5, and then 4. And what we found is, you'll see in the pie charts, it's a very simplistic labeling of answers, which is between acceptable, does it pretty much answer this question with all the right components, incomplete, some of the right components, missing some context, or wrong, or that's being cut off. What was wrong? Oh, wrong, or making stuff up, or inaccurately answering not in text. And so that's another category of knowledge retrieval we were really keen to dig into around the hallucination risk of, are you going to be able to successfully identify if information is not in the text that we provided, or are you going to come up with some kind of hypothesis that isn't correct? And so a lot of the testing was around things that we didn't expect it to be able to answer as well. So the findings and why we stopped was we did find really easy setup, actually. Easier with Vertex AI than it was with GPTs, but GPTs had better performance. But even with the better performance, it's still kind of middling, and we only fed it really simple questions to begin with. What is this? That kind of question. And quite uncomfortable with the number of incomplete and wrong answers, definitely not mature enough to put in front of partners in the near future. And really required expert review to know that if something was incomplete or inaccurate. And so from a data science perspective, we knew that we probably could get the level of acceptable answers up, but it would require quite a lot of significant further work that kind of negated the easy setup plug and go. So it'd be having to kind of go through our knowledge base and label that up in a way that would help the assistant sift through that more accurately. So we made a decision to stop and wait. Perhaps we'll come back to this. We know this area is likely to improve in the future. A lot of vendor promises around improvement in the future. And then the pivot was, what existing tools can we draw on so we don't have to build it ourselves or kind of customize it ourselves? And so the pivot was, let's improve search. And so we had the team maintaining the search of our documentation was doing very simple search, kind of keyword matching. And we're like, well, we can definitely do something to improve this. Like search has definitely moved on beyond keyword matching. So let's do some kind of sort of synonym-based search. And also we discovered that we're about to roll out some AI functionalities within another knowledge management tool. We use something called Guru. And so we could probably put more of our documentation into Guru. It was supposed to be there anyway. And then try and use some of their AI Q&A as a substitute for having to build it ourselves. So that was our kind of fail fast. Overall, some of the learnings we have from running data bets, we've run 10, I think, so far, is that having this regular pace of review has been really valuable. So the 6-week cycle, specifically. And so one of our heads of data, who's also the sponsor of a couple of bets, has said it's been really great to have this sense of urgency of like, oh, we've got to demo something in front of the data leadership team in a week, and we better have something to show for it. And so just kind of giving some impetus to the team to make sure that they've met what they said they were going to do, maybe gone over and above and done a bit more. But also to have that governance of what feels like some quite risky ideas in different areas, and a bit of reassurance that there have been lots of eyes on it, particularly from an interdisciplinary sense, because a lot of the ideas that we're trialing are a little bit more spanning across different departments, and we're not used to working across different departments so well, and so it's good to have kind of eyes on that. The other learning was around separating out overall success criteria of what we're seeking to do with the bet from the bet validation criteria, because, or kind of the bet graduation criteria as well. To graduate a bet is a slightly different set of KPIs than the overarching KPIs that we're going for. So using the OSP assistant, the GenAI assistant one, so the bet KPI was just saving a little bit of time in one team. But the overarching KPI is enabling all of our partners to save lots of time and build confidence. And it's important to kind of differentiate between those, because then you can be a lot more robust about scrutinizing whether the bet is on track or not. If you've got a really ambitious, vague goal, it can be quite tempting to say, let's let it run for a bit longer, and maybe we'll get there. But if you've got a really specific bet validation criteria, and it's not getting anywhere near that 15%, or not the level of accuracy you're expecting, it's easier to shut down. The third learning is that graduation does not necessarily guarantee success, and just getting something okayed by senior stakeholders or used by a couple of teams or onto a roadmap does not guarantee that it's going to actually follow through into that overarching success that we're hoping for. And what we found is the bet sponsors have had to continue putting in some time to embed something and evangelize for it, even after it's met that initial graduation success. So the work doesn't stop there. And an open question, and would love thoughts on this, but that we're trying to think through at the moment is it better to spread bets and have a range of risk level, a range of ambition, and see what works? Or should we focus our efforts on fewer and bigger ideas and work on them more consistently? We've done big bets, we've done little bets. One bet has run, it will probably be running over a year, which I hadn't really anticipated. But is that better? Should we be doing small things? I think maybe it's a mixture of the two, but would love ideas on that. And that's what I wanted to share today. So really happy to take any questions. I think there's a microphone coming around. If you could just introduce yourself and ask a question.
Hi, I'm Morris. Thanks for the talk just now. I think maybe the number one question I want to ask is this executive sponsors that you have, how did that came about in the first place? Like, how do you present this to them? Like, and basically the first one is always the hardest, right? How did the first sponsorship? Because I think bets are cool, but I think it's more important that there's sponsor to support this, and there's 10 bets is really cool.
Yeah. So the bet sponsors, the bet sponsor role tends to be a member of the data leadership team, and so it's a little bit like we're sponsoring our own things initially, and we went through an ideation exercise. Whereby everyone was asked to come up with an idea for a bet, and then we picked the best ones, and then whoever came up with that idea kind of automatically became the sponsor. What worked really well about that is they then became on the hook for finding resource, and often allocated resource within their own team, because that's the resource they have available, a bit harder to convince a colleague to lend you some of their team. What you might be referring to is also getting the sponsorship outside of the data organization. They start off as stakeholders, but I suppose upon graduation, they should be taking on some of the sponsorship role. I think what helps is to have them involved in some of the incubation, providing feedback on that. And so it's not landing cold, but then the graduation criteria provides a bit of a decision point for a kind of a go, no go. And if they're not willing to put some resource into it, or to endorse it and ask their teams to use something, or spend more time on something, then that means the bet is not sort of succeeding in graduation, and then that's when we either have to pivot or terminate. And so creating those decision points as part of the bet infrastructure, I think, works, and making it a lot more explicit as part of the kind of bet success model or not. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, thank you so much. Thank you.
Hi, no, thank you so much for the presentation. I guess my question is, the examples that were given were mostly internal company use. So how would you apply this, I guess, to ideas that have to go through testing with the customer, A/B testing, etc.?
Yeah.
So have you implemented certain techniques to kind of speed up collaboration, for example, in data science and product engineering, or kind of like the testing itself with the customers? So yeah, I'd love your insight on that.
Yeah. It's kind of on purpose. So the whole I think the bet is only really meant to cover the first bit of a data lifecycle in terms of proving an idea and getting support from it internally. And so I would expect the testing with customers to happen once a bet has graduated onto a roadmap, and then it kind of goes into a business as usual. So you would be doing the testing, you would be doing the rollout and the kind of sell around getting partners to engage with and provide feedback and use it. And so that would be almost it's covered in other processes. We're really trying to just influence landing the idea, and then if the idea lands, then it moves on to a lot of the kind of testing methodologies. The way that the data team is structured for us is we are embedded within streams, but a little bit independent still. And so like influencing felt like it was the problem that we were trying to solve here, and getting new ideas socialized it's once there's buy-in for an idea, like testing and rollout is kind of not the issue that we're seeking to solve.
Okay, no, thank you so much.
Thank you. Sorry, can you hear me?
Yeah.
Yeah, so I'm Harvin Roy from the Civil Service, so thank you for the presentation. So, so very familiar working in an agile environment. I'm not entirely sure whether it also applies to everyone else who works in agile, but usually sprints are around 2 weeks.
Right.
And usually, we would tend to work on one big thing, but scope allowing, we would tend to work on multiple things at once. So I'm just wondering, you mentioned about having like this database being like a 6-week sprint plus review. So I'm just wondering whether there's been like a lot of disruption sort of moving towards that kind of process whilst working on other things at the same time.
Yeah. I think we're trying to subvert the whole working on one big thing. Or at least we're trying to say we work on one big thing and then we have a side experiment that we run with, because you kind of need a range of projects. Because the big thing might be very transformational, but it might only cover business, like our kind of business trajectory for the next year, and then we don't want to be left without good ideas for year 2, year 3, and so data bets is just diverting a small proportion of the team onto validating a hypothesis. Some companies do this in 10% time. This is throwing a bit more effort at it and a bit more structure at it. Which I think increases the chances of success. And so I think it might work well if you've got kind of existing structures to sort of take it away from those and say, we're going to work on it a little bit differently. We'll maybe pull only a couple of people from your kind of 2-week workload, if you can. And then they might kind of run things slightly differently, but you could definitely adapt it to a 2-week cycle. It very much depends on what percentage of people you can divert and how big the idea is.
So you have quite a lot of people working in your team.
So we've got, I lose count, but anything between 120 and 150 people in across the data teams. And I think in terms of the number of people working on bets, we tend to have between 3 and, I think the maximum number of bets we had running at one time was 6. So it's not a massive diversion of resource. And there's an element of prioritization that goes into, we need to work on good ideas, because that's like, that don't have a massive impact on business as usual, because then we have to have some quite tough conversations with other stakeholders.
Sorry, one final sub-question. And if the bet does become successful, do you have something that accounts to like a mini alpha version?
Oh, what, sorry?
Like a mini alpha?
What's a mini alpha?
So think within like the sprint cycle within agile environment. So like the first like working product or first version of a working product within product life cycle would be like the alpha version or first version. So would you have something equivalent to that?
Ideally, we already have the first version within the bet. The bet is the first version, and then so it becomes building from an initial base. But that definitely could be something that we do. Again, very much depends on the shape of the bet itself.
Sorry, guys, but I think we're towards the end of the session and we need time for the other speaker. So thank you so much. Let's give her a final applaud. Thank you so much, Myrna.